What's up, everybody? So today we're going to talk about the topic of the last days and final moments of Brushy Bill Roberts, who claimed to be Billy the Kid. Now, the scope of this discussion is going to be about the last 30 days of Brushy Bill's life, and this is going to include the period leading up to the meeting with the governor of New Mexico, Thomas Mabry, whom he approached for a pardon, the actual meeting with the governor, and the aftermath of that meeting. It's also going to cover his private correspondence with his lawyer, William Vincent Morrison, and a lot of the details that that correspondence contains. And then finally, sadly, it's going to end with the death of Brushy Bill Roberts on the streets of Hyco, Texas in December of 1950. Now, as we get into this topic, it's very important to understand why the events during this period are so critical to the claims of Brushy Bill that he was Billy the Kid. Because as we all know, the story that came out of his meeting with the governor was extremely negative. The governor decided that he would take no action on the petition for pardon because he personally did not believe the old man's claims. Now, critics for 70 years have used what happened at the governor's mansion as proof that Brushy Bill was just a fraud or a hoax. But as I'm going to share with you today, that is literally not an option. And I know what you might be thinking. Wait a minute. Of course it's an option. You can't tell me that my only two choices are Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid or Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. So if he wasn't Billy the Kid and he was making the claim that he was Billy the Kid when he wasn't, well, that's a fraudulent claim. And so by definition, Brushy Bill would be a fraud because he's making a fraudulent claim. And I agree with you on that point. That is absolutely true. And that is an option that we may choose to believe or choose not to believe. But what is literally not possible based on the evidence is that this was a coordinated hoax or a publicity stunt on behalf of Brushy Bill Roberts and his attorneys. So despite all the talking points and the drive-by headlines, when you look at the actual evidence in the historical record, a lot of which I'm going to be sharing with you today, there is absolutely no evidence that Mr. Morrison or Brushy Bill was seeking publicity, and there is no evidence that this was a coordinated hoax on behalf of Mr. Morrison and Brushy Bill. What's more, it's highly unreasonable to believe that Brushy Bill Roberts himself was a fraud and was able to deceive William Vincent Morrison, his attorneys, the University of New Mexico Press, C.L. Sonneson, and the other people that vouched for his story. And so anyone who approaches this topic from that perspective, that it was just a big elaborate hoax, is going to run smack into evidence that proves exactly the opposite. And it doesn't really matter which approach you take. To say that Brushy Bill was himself personally a fraud and he acted alone in that deception, that line of thinking isn't going to pan out. So you then go to the next possible solution, that Morrison was a fraud and Morrison orchestrated himself, and that also is not going to pan out, again, in the face of the evidence. And then lastly, you have Brushy Bill acting in concert with somebody else, either Mr. Morrison or the people that signed the affidavits or all of the above. And again, when you look at the primary evidence in this case, that line of thinking isn't going to work out either. And so at the end of the day, if you want to know what my opinion is, after looking at all this, there's going to be two possible options. The first option is that Brushy Bill was somehow a participant or close to somebody who knew many of the intimate details of the Lincoln County War, the localities of Fort Sumner and Lincoln, and all the people and places in those localities, and lots of other things that at the time had not yet been understood or revealed by historians. But not only that, he would have to have a photographic memory to gather and retain all of this information. When critical to that point of view is the position that he was Oliver Pleasant Roberts, a farmer from Texas who had never even been to New Mexico. So where we end up is, even if you can talk yourself into some of the pillars of that position, you're going to find that that position in totality does not come together to form a composite whole that makes sense. As a matter of fact, the only position that seems, based on the actual evidence, to form a composite whole and make perfect sense in context is the position that Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. Now, I want to be clear. I don't care if Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. And I'm really not even trying to convince you that he was Billy the Kid. But today I'm going to show you the truth of what happened in November of 1950 and beyond. And first, we're going to dive right into the Albuquerque Journal's article on December 1st, 1950. And we're going to observe the differences in how this event was portrayed before the meeting with the governor and after the meeting with the governor. I'm also going to share with you never before seen documents from Mr. Morrison's personal files. So let's get going. The title of this article is Billy the Kid Bubble Busts as Governor Mabry rejects the oldster's claim. Santa Fe, New Mexico. The bubble burst today for the buckskin-clad, vain little man who claims he is 91 years old and is the one and only true Billy the Kid. Governor Thomas Mabry rejected both the man's claim of being Billy the Kid and his request for a full and complete pardon so he can die a free man. For the time being, at least, history books will continue to record that Billy the Kid, the West's most notorious juvenile delinquent punk, was shot to death by Sheriff Pat Garrett at Fort Sumner, New Mexico, July 14th, 1881. At that time, the kid was 21 years old and had boasted that he had killed 21 men. Quote, I am taking no action now or ever on this application for a pardon for Billy the Kid because I do not believe this man is Billy the Kid, end quote. Governor Mabry said after a 45-minute interview with the aged man who alternatively referred to himself as Billy the Kid, Billy Roberts, Henry Roberts, and Ollie Roberts. The request for the pardon was first presented to Governor Mabry last week by an El Paso law firm, which said it was acting solely as a legal representative for a William V. Morrison, who was seeking the petition for pardon on behalf of the man Morrison claimed was Billy the Kid. Mabry said today he had no further communication from the law firm. It was Morrison who brought Roberts to today's interview in the executive mansion where the governor had been confined for a week with a severe cold. The interview was arranged after Mabry said he would take no action at all on the pardon request until he had a personal interview with the man claiming to be Billy the Kid. Roberts refused to say where he had been living or is living at the present time, and Morrison, who described himself as a traveling salesman and gave his permanent home as St. Louis, said Roberts' refusal to reveal his personal address stemmed from a current serious illness of Roberts' wife. The governor's disbelief was shared by more than a score of newsmen, state historians, and descendants of men who figured in the Billy the Kid saga who attended the interview. That disbelief was nourished on many things. Quote, Roberts did not remember without prompting from Morrison the name of Pat Garrett, nor did he remember much about the famous Lincoln County cattle war in which Billy the Kid earned much of his infamous reputation. He could not recollect the names of important leaders in the Lincoln County fracas, nor the way the factions lined up. At times, he referred to Billy the Kid as he, and at other times, he used the personal pronoun I. Roberts said he was born at Buffalo Gap in Taylor County, Texas, and that the family later moved to Hamilton County, Texas. But J.W. Hendren, Santa Fe historian and author of a book about Billy the Kid, says it is a, quote, well-documented fact, end quote, that Billy the Kid was born in New York City, November 23rd, 1859. Roberts said that when he previously escaped from the Lincoln County Courthouse on April 28th, 1881, he shot no one. But history and county records, however, detailed that the kid killed 2 guards and shot a 3rd guard in his escape. Roberts used his right hand in holding his cane, in drinking water from a glass, in buttoning his jacket, and straightening his hat today, but tradition has it the kid was left-handed. The article goes on to say that Garrett's kin scoffed at him. Oscar Garrett of Odessa, Texas, son of the sheriff who history says shot the kid to death, refused to question Roberts, adding that, quote, I don't want to dignify this claim with any questions, end quote. His brother Jarvis, here on a visit from South America, also scoffed at Roberts' claim that he was Billy the Kid. After today's interview, Oscar Garrett declared Roberts was, quote, either a deliberate imposter or the victim of a delusion, end quote. Garrett also said that Roberts' claim is a, quote, slur on the character of my father and on every pioneer in New Mexico at that time, end quote. Pat Garrett reported to Territorial Governor Lew Wallace that he had killed the kid and claimed the $500 reward offered for the kid. Really? That's not exactly how that went down, but got it. Quote, I've never capitalized on being Pat Garrett's son, end quote, Oscar Garrett said. Quote, I just want to see the record kept straight, end quote. Okay. I mean, they want to keep the record the way they had it. That's for dang sure. Balding and extremely sensitive about it, Roberts at one time pounded on the dining room table in the governor's mansion where the interview was held and demanded, don't you dare take any pictures of me with my hat off. I won't have pictures taken of me with my hat off. He then carefully set his hat on his head, threw back his shoulders, and posed proudly for picture after picture. Roberts, resplendent in a yellow buckskin jacket and a bright green fatigue bandana, declared that the man killed by Pat Garrett was a man named Billy Barlow. Roberts said both he and Barlow worked for John Chisholm during the Lincoln County War. Me and Billy Barlow, Roberts declared, was as much alike as 2 black-eyed peas. You couldn't tell us apart. The night he was supposed to have been killed, Roberts said, Barlow wanted him to go to Pete Maxwell's house, where history records Billy the Kid died with his boots on in front of Pat Garrett's blazing guns. With his boots on? I thought he had socks on. But whatever, we're not going to be critical. I get it. But I knew there was a trap there, Roberts said today, and I wouldn't go. But Barlow drank a heap, and he was half shot at the time. He went right into the trap and was killed, not me. Roberts refused to answer questions about being wounded in gun battles at Mockingbird Gap and at Stinking Springs. These were put to him by Will Robinson, pioneer New Mexico newsman who himself is past 80 and known as a historian of the Lincoln County War. So these are the very people who've made their name on what they say about the Lincoln County War. Now you have an actual participant potentially coming to tell them what really happened. Are they really incentivized to like, oh, well, maybe you're right. You know, I kind of lied about that, or I wasn't sure about that. So no, they're not. So whatever, we'll get into this. Robert says he was wounded many times and showed a scar in his bald head. He said that he got the scar in the gunfight at the Maxwell house. He said that he ran to Maxwell's house after he heard the shots there. A shot creased his skull and knocked him out. He said he was treated for that wound by a Mexican woman and by Celsa Gutierrez. He described Celsa Gutierrez as Pat Garrett's sister-in-law and said she was his, Robert's, sweetheart at the time. While he was being treated, he said Barlow's body was being passed off as his. That's because we were so much alike. Morrison, meanwhile, told newsmen that he first became interested in Billy the Kid case while he was associated with the R.F. Roberts accounting and law firm at Beaumont, Texas. He said Roberts and the man who claims to be Billy the Kid are distant relatives. We are satisfied, Morrison said, that this man is not an imposter, but is the real Billy the Kid. Morrison and Roberts headed back to Albuquerque after the interview with the governor. They spent last night at an Albuquerque hotel and came to Santa Fe this morning for the interview. Morrison would not comment on what he intends to do now in the affair. Okay, man, there you go. That's what happened at the governor's mansion, according to the Albuquerque Journal. Who could argue with that? Now, that article mentions a petition for pardon that was submitted by an El Paso law firm, Andrus, Lipscomb, and Peticolas. And as far as I know, the actual petition letter has never been shown to the public. And I happen to have a copy, and I'm going to share it with you right now. So as you can see, this is on official letterhead from the law firm. It's dated November the 15th, 1950, when I believe is when it was submitted to the governor of New Mexico. It reads, to the Honorable Thomas J. Mabry, Governor, State of New Mexico, State Capital, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Honorable Sir, application is herewith respectfully made for a full unconditional pardon for William Henry Roberts, alias William Henry Bonney, alias William H. Antrim, alias The Kid, alias Billy the Kid, alias A.L. Roberts, who was wrongfully convicted of murder in Donna Ana County, territory of New Mexico, after a change of venue from Lincoln County in April 1881. Pretty technical stuff. After such wrongful conviction, and in the desperation brought about by reason of the facts revealed in the enclosed verified statements, affidavits, letters, news articles, etc., Billy the Kid escaped from the Lincoln County Jail and has never thereafter been apprehended. Okay, so when you put this in front of the governor, you need to provide the context. So, hey, just so you know, there was this cattle war. The governor offered amnesty. He excluded Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid wrote to him. They had a meeting. He promised him a part. So that's why there's letters, articles, different things, okay? So some people may say, well, that ain't evidence. Okay, it's context for why he's asking for a pardon, all right? The petition goes on. There is a legend that this applicant was killed by Sheriff Pat F. Garrett in July of 1881 at Fort Sumner, San Miguel County, New Mexico, but this legend has no competent evidence and support and is wholly improper and untrue. It is a matter of fact, applicant was not killed by anyone and lived in Old Mexico for many years. As proved by the attached file of affidavits, statements, letters, etc., Territorial Governor Lew Wallace promised to pardon the applicant for all the offenses committed by him upon his promise to 1. Surrender to the Sheriff of Lincoln County. 2. Furnish statements to the governor on general conditions existing in Lincoln County. 3. Testify before the grand jury concerning the disturbances in Lincoln County and in connection with the murder of Houston J. Chapman, an attorney on a public street in Lincoln. And 4. To plead to the indictment against him in the Lincoln County District Court. The applicant carried out his agreement to the letter, but the promises made to him were never carried out. Okay, so Billy the Kid did all 4 things the governor had asked him to do, and the governor said, if you do this, I'm going to give you a pardon. And he did it, and the governor didn't give him a pardon. So even at this late date, it is highly proper and essential that the terms of the original agreement with Governor Lew Wallace, territorial governor of New Mexico, be carried out by the executive of the state of New Mexico, and that the full pardon be granted in order for the remaining days of the applicant, now past 90 years of age, may be spent in peace. We are sure that the great amount of work and effort reflected by this enclosed file is readily apparent. Considering the sentence the applicant is under, it has been impossible for him to live openly without fear. Respectfully submitted, William Henry Roberts, along with his aliases. Okay, now I need to point something out, and I'll use an analogy which may be a bad one. But J. Frank Dalton, and I don't have a position on J. Frank Dalton, but he claimed to be Jesse James. When he went in front of the court and tried to change his name back to Jesse James because he had been using the name J. Frank Dalton, if I'm understanding it correctly, the judge basically said, well, you never legally changed it in the first place, so why are you trying to now legally change it back? So it was kind of a stunt, apparently, by Dalton and the people around him to get like this legal blessing, kind of like Pat Garrett's lawyer Green did with the reward money. You know, the reward money for Pat Garrett was a legislative act. He actually didn't, collect it normally like you would collect it like governor offers a reward, you provide proof, you get the money. That didn't happen, okay? He provided the proof, the governor didn't give him the money, they claimed it was a technicality, whatever, but it didn't happen the way they said it happened. And as a matter of fact, we now know that Green, his attorney, when he submitted the request for the legislature to give him the reward, he didn't use the coroner's jury report. There was no basis other than, hey, it's commonly accepted he killed Billy the Kid, he should be rewarded. So people do try to use official acts of government as, quote, proof of identity or death or all kinds of things, right? He was legally declared dead, he must be dead. Well, he's not dead. There have been people that have been legally declared dead, and so they're technically dead, and then they show up again. So that is a major distinction in this case. Morrison wasn't trying to prove Billy the Kid was alive. He didn't have to prove Billy the Kid was alive because there was no legal document proving his death. So originally, a lot of the work he was doing was trying to set aside the death certificate, and then he realized this was never recorded. There's no legal proof of his death, which is different than whether you believe it or not, or whether I believe it or not. So a lot of times we're going to talk about evidence and things like that. This was a legal case, very, very specific. And I'm going to share a private letter that's never before been seen, I don't think, from Mr. Morrison's files to this lady who was trolling him after the meeting with the governor. Okay, and this letter was written December 18th, 1950 to a Ruth T. Rogers, Los Gatos, California. Man, that property is probably worth a heck of a lot more. That's a hot area now. Dear Madam, your letter of November 27th addressed to Mr. Andrus, attorney of record in the case of pardon on behalf of Billy the Kid, has been handed to me for attention. The investigation into the records and evidence in the matter was made by this writer. Therefore, it was suggested that I make reply to your letter. Now, you're going to see in a moment, the petition for pardon was submitted on the 15th, and Governor Mabry leaked it to the press on the 24th, I believe it was. So after the 24th, this media circus is created. Everybody starts piling in. This lady apparently wanted to give her 2 cents, and so she wrote to the law firm because you'll see in these articles that Ted Andrus's name appeared on the petition for pardon. Now, I just showed you the petition for pardon, and Brushy Bill signed the petition for pardon. So I think probably there was a cover letter from Ted Andrus, and then the actual petition would be signed by the petitioner, I suppose. And what I have is a copy, as it says plainly on there, as a copy. It's not the original. And we'll talk about where the original is in a minute. And he says, it is interesting to learn that you are certain that Billy the Kid was killed by one shot from the gun of Sheriff Pat Garrett at the bedside of Pete Maxwell. We did not know that fact. And I don't think that Morrison's really being a smartass here. I think that he was very serious, no nonsense, and you'll see why he says this in a minute. But she basically, I guess, is lecturing him. Everybody knows Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid with one shot from his gun, whatever. So it kind of sounds like a smartass, but I don't think that was really his personality. Like, he's not trying to be mean or hateful. He's just trying to clearly explain his position. So he says, it's interesting to learn you are certain that Billy the Kid was killed by one shot from the gun of Sheriff Pat Maxwell at the bedside of Pete Maxwell. We didn't know that. There's no record to support your contention. Of course, we were only interested in legal evidence. Don't care about the legend. And since none was made available, we decided that a legal declaration of the death of William Bonney had never been made. He tried. There's letters. This is extremely well documented. And everybody wants to say, oh, but there's a coroner's report. We have a copy. Look, it's not in the official record. It's not official. It doesn't matter to a court. Does it matter in public opinion? Okay, sure. Maybe to some people, but it doesn't matter in a court of law. That's all he cared about, because this was a serious legal matter. Therefore, as you can understand, it would not be possible to have a court set aside a non-existent declaration of death, right? So again, legally, Billy the Kid's not dead. You are probably not aware that Paulina Maxwell and most of those mentioned in your letter, I wish I had this letter, I don't, were friends of Billy the Kid and not friends of Garrett. You further state that the kid was born in New York City, November 1859. Upon what record or document do you base your opinion? The photostatic copy of the page from the New York Times, which was at one time displayed in the Lincoln Museum, has been held to be untrue and not as it has been purported to be. Photostatic copies of this proof will be furnished to interested parties. We are not interested in any record or purported record of which a certified copy is not obtainable. You may be aware of the fact that two purported coroner's verdicts signed by different jurors were rendered in the purported death of Billy the Kid. Are you aware of the fact that neither purported verdict was made a matter of record? Therefore, it is impossible to obtain a certified copy of either one. I'm certain that upon inquiry to the proper officer, you will be so informed. I presume that you are familiar with the records and evidence made in the case of the kid. Yours very truly, William V. Morrison. Okay, so this lady's owned. She's basically the 1950 version of an internet ninja saying, hey, I read in a book somewhere Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid. You don't know what you're talking about. But he didn't know what he's talking about. Serious legal matter. Now, let's get back to the petition for pardon. There's a couple of interesting things. I already mentioned that it's marked copy, and we're going to talk about where the original is in a minute. Second, this one is signed by the petitioner himself, Brushy Bill Roberts. And then most importantly, I want to point out that the petition for pardon that Brushy was seeking was for a very specific crime. And that crime was the murder of Sheriff William Brady, because that is the crime that he was tried for in Dona Ana County, convicted of, and sentenced to hang for. So very important, Brushy Bill was not going to the governor saying, I want a pardon for being Billy the Kid. He was going to the governor to seek a pardon for the conviction of killing Sheriff William Brady. That's a very significant distinction, because it's flawed thinking that takes skeptics down the wrong trail. Now, according to history, Billy the Kid killed quite a few people other than Sheriff William Brady. He killed deputies Ollinger and Bell when he escaped the Lincoln County Jail, and he killed a lot of other people. So if that's the case, why isn't he asking for a pardon for those crimes also? Well, again, this is a serious legal matter. It's not a fun and games journey through legend or history. This was present day in 1950 to these people, and it was a very real life and death reality. And Billy the Kid was never tried and convicted for killing Ollinger and Bell. So he's not going to admit to two murders, especially two murders of police officers, in front of anybody. I mean, if you were him, would you put that in there? Oh, and by the way, I killed a lot of other people. It'd be nice if I could get kind of a preemptive pardon for those charges. I don't think so. Again, most people get this wrong. They get it wrong because they're not thinking in the context of the time, and they fail to realize that the fact something's novel or interesting to the public today doesn't change how it was viewed in the past. And what I mean by that is, yes, Billy the Kid being alive was a sensation in 1950. And yes, there's no active law enforcement people looking for him at that time. But that's because everybody thought he was dead. And he had still been sentenced to be executed by a court of law for killing Sheriff Brady. And that just doesn't go away no matter how long you disappear and have been out of the public eye. So what we as modern researchers are often missing when we look at these historical events is the very real, personal, emotional burden of the consequences of what could happen in their future. Does that make sense? We know, of course, now, Brushy was never arrested. The governor turned this into a media circus. It wasn't that big of a deal. It's fine. But they didn't know that. When Brushy Bill made the decision to come forward, he was claiming the death sentence of Billy the Kid and saying, yes, that belongs to me. That's mine. And I'd like a pardon for it. That's very serious stuff. And it was very real, very stressful and very concerning. So don't let anybody dismiss the significance of this petition for pardon. Oh, it's just a big hoax. He just wanted to be famous. You don't claim a death sentence. You don't say, hey, Ted Bundy said he murdered all those people. I actually murdered like 4 of them. Can I get that pardon? Like, would that be cool? Do you mind if I they were really murdered by me, not him? Like, hello, this is literally a life and death serious decision that was not undertaken lightly. And this is what anyone who makes the uninformed claim with no evidence that this whole thing was a hoax does not understand. I'm going to show you that it actually was a hoax, but the hoax was perpetrated by the governor of New Mexico. And I'm going to show you exactly why I say that. Now, not only did Brushy Bill understand the seriousness of this, but Mr. Morrison and the law firm of Andrus, Lipscomb, and Peticolas knew very well that if Morrison did prove that Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid, stuff would get real really quick. Because it would be at that exact moment that the supposed wheels of justice would be turning again, and they'd be turning to crush William H. Bonney like they did 70 years before. And that is why, and I think very, very, very few people actually know this, but that is why when the petition for pardon was made, the law firm did not reveal the name of their client. And they also tried to establish conditions for the old man to come forward. Have you heard that before? The identity of Brushy Bill Roberts was originally completely anonymous. And there were conditions put in place to protect him that Governor Mabry agreed to, and then apparently, based on the evidence, very dishonestly broke his promise and manipulated the circumstances to allow himself to do whatever the hell he wanted to do and get away with it. Not many people know this. So the fact that Brushy Bill was supposed to be anonymous may explain the use of, quote, A.L. Roberts in the signature on the petition instead of like O.L. Roberts or O.P. Roberts. The law firm said we have Billy the Kid, but they didn't provide his full name or address and provided no photos. His identity remained undisclosed. As a matter of fact, contrary to what people have said for 70 years, Brushy Bill had no plan to come out publicly at all unless the pardon was granted. This was a private legal matter. Let me say that again. Not only was he not known, he had no plan to come out publicly. So the idea that he wanted publicity, this is a big hoax, is not true at all. Matter of fact, there was no request by the law firm for Brushy Bill and Morrison to meet the governor. It was Governor Mabry that insisted on the meeting, or he wouldn't act on the pardon. If you read, among the many other sources, the El Paso Herald-Post from November 25th, 1950, it clearly says, quote, officially, Governor Mabry said he would take no action until the attorneys produced the outlaw for an interview, end quote. And that same comment is in other papers as well, including the one I read when I started this presentation. So here's what happened. The law firm submits a petition for pardon on behalf of Brushy Bill Roberts to the governor and says, we have the wanted fugitive Billy the Kid, and he wants to turn himself in, and he will turn himself in, but we got to have a few conditions. And here's the 3 conditions. Number 1, no publicity. He wants no publicity. You got to keep this private. Number 2, you got to promise us you're not going to arrest him. Number 3, he's not going to reveal himself at all unless he gets the pardon. And do you know what Mabry says? He says, okay, yeah, okay, no problem. Yeah, I'll agree to all 3 conditions, but you got to at least let me meet the guy if you want me to pardon him. I mean, that's fair, right? I can't pardon somebody I've never met. No problem on the other stuff. Matter of fact, we'll do the meeting at my house. We're not going to do it at the office where there's a bunch of people. Come to my house. I'll give you a private meeting, like Billy the Kid met with Lou Wallace before. So this isn't that unusual. So other than that, deal. But we know that Mabry is the one who lied to Mr. Morrison. He lied to the law firm of Andrus, Lipscomb, and Peticolas. He coordinated with the media to make a good story. He invited a bunch of people that shouldn't have been there and excluded people like Severo Gallegos and Martil Abel. And he never even gave them the private meeting that he promised. And we know this because we can look at the historical record and see how this played out. And like I said, how it's portrayed prior to the meeting at the governor's mansion and after the meeting at the governor's mansion are 2 very different things. So I want to set the stage for you a little bit, and I want to show you some articles from before the meeting took place. And the first one is from November the 25th, 1950. and is found in the El Paso Herald-Post. Now, you may have seen this newspaper before because this is the newspaper that runs with the story that Billy the Kid had visited Martil Abel in July. And so there it is. And there's good information in that article, but the one I'm really wanting to focus on is the one below it that says link Billy the Kid with the EP Centennial. If you don't know, the EP Centennial is the El Paso Centennial. El Paso was founded in 1850, and this is now 1950. So the 100-year celebration of the EP Centennial was going to be literally the day after the scheduled meeting with the governor. And through a miracle of coincidence, it just so happened that during that centennial celebration, they had decided they were going to reenact the death of Billy the Kid at the hands of Pat Garrett in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And so when the governor comes out on November the 24th and says, hey, everybody, Billy the Kid's alive and he's come to me for a pardon, I'm going to be meeting with him, the media circus explodes. And the chairman of the Centennial Committee, Mr. Sightsinger, says, wouldn't it be cool if the real Billy the Kid shows up at our centennial celebration? So let me share this article with you. If the lawyers for Billy the Kid aren't kidding, promoters of the El Paso County Centennial want him to appear during the centennial celebration December 1st through 3rd. Ralph Sightsinger, chairman of the Centennial Committee, isn't taking any chances either way. He flew into the middle of the muddle, which exploded yesterday at Santa Fe when Governor Thomas J. Mabry announced the Kid had asked for a pardon through his attorneys, the firm of Andrus, Lipscomb, and Peticolas of El Paso. Sightsinger caught an afternoon plane for Santa Fe yesterday. He hopes to talk Governor Mabry into giving Billy the Kid a pardon. A publicity spokesman for the Centennial Committee denied that Billy's petition to the governor is a hoax. He said the committee decided to enter the negotiations with Mabry to exploit an appearance of Billy at the Centennial. And that was the situation today. Billy's back and the Centennials got him, if he really is back and if they can really get him. The Centennial hopes did not receive a boost, however, from attorney Ted Andrus, whose signature appeared on Billy the Kid's petition to Governor Mabry. He's old and tired, Andrus said. He wants no publicity and will not consent to the release of any pictures until the pardon is settled. If he can talk to Governor Mabry personally without the presence of newspaper people, he'll be happy to talk to Governor Mabry, but not for the purpose of being arrested again and not for the purpose of publicity, end quote. So right there, does that sound like what you've heard? No publicity, private meeting. And the critics in the newspapers said exactly the opposite. These people always accuse other people of what they do. If Andrus's firm, which is actually fronting for St. Louis attorney William V. Morrison, has its information straight, Billy the Kid has been on the dodge for the past 70 years and is a bit tired of it all. His lawyers say the Kid, whose real name was William Henry Bonney, wants a full pardon for his crimes so that he can lead a normal life. It is common belief that the Kid died July 14th, 1881, before the blazing guns of Sheriff Pat Garrett at Fort Sumner, New Mexico. In fact, James R. Watts, 91, now of Cayuga, Texas, said today he was with Garrett when he killed the Kid. Come on, dude. Like, really? I was there. He was there. You were there. Everybody's there. People really want to be relevant and put themselves into this story. Maybe he was there. I don't know. Everybody was there, apparently. I wonder if he cried. He cried, man. In 1882, the territorial legislature awarded Garrett $500 for slaying the desperado. Well, that's true. The El Paso attorneys contend that the Kid escaped the Fort Sumner gunfight, seriously wounded, and had been living in Mexico ever since. Now, he'd like to come home to live openly without fear. But the governor is wary. Rumors that the Kid is alive have been heard frequently, but this is believed to be the first effort to make it official. It was attacked promptly from various quarters. Officially, Governor Mabry said he would take no action until the attorneys produced the outlaw for an interview. There were other reactions. The Federal Bureau of Investigation adopted a hands-off policy, its Albuquerque office saying there's no outstanding warrant for the Kid's arrest. W.A. Kelleher, Albuquerque historian and prominent state historian, took the stand of a doubter. I believe this is just one more of the perennial appearances of persons who claim to be Billy the Kid. He said, okay, so right away, it's BS, right? So what's interesting, though, is the FBI adopted a hands-off policy, but they talked to the FBI. So what's interesting here is in that article, it says that Governor Thomas Mabry announced the day before. So that was November the 24th, 1950. And here we are the very next day, and a guy who heard the news all the way down in El Paso, hopped the same day flight to fly up to see the governor, to convince him with no evidence to pardon this guy because he wants him to come to his centennial celebration, which is Friday through Sunday, little centennial celebration, or maybe a big centennial celebration in El Paso. Got it. But what's also interesting is there's a huge article on Martil Abel. So wait a minute, this was just announced yesterday. And so they would have had to, one, find Martil Abel, go to her house, wherever she is, interview her, take pictures, write the story, and get it to press, all within a couple hours for this to run the next day. Because these papers are printed overnight, like, midnight or whatever, and then they're out, the next morning, very, very early. So wait a minute. How did they have enough time to do all that with Martil Abel? And you'll see there's other articles with Severo Gallegos. If he announced it on the 24th, how did they get all these stories out on the 25th? Also, how did they know who Martil Abel was? How did she know she's a witness that signed an affidavit? There's only one way. The governor gave them the information. So a law firm says, we want no publicity. We have the wanted fugitive Billy the Kid, who's under the sentence of death for killing a sheriff. He can prove his identity with evidence, but he wants to pardon before he reveals himself. And the governor says, we got to let me meet the guy. So he's like, okay, we'll let you meet the guy privately at your house, whatever. But before that meeting, without telling the law firm, the governor tells the press, and not only tells the press, hey, this is going to happen, he leaks the evidence and the names of the freaking witnesses to the press so they can go harass them and write articles about it. Is that not wrong? Like, it seems wrong to me. And what it shows is that Mabry or his office or both colluded with the press before November 24th when he officially released it, because they had all the info and had all their stuff ready so they could run it as soon as he announced it. Very, very shady and highly, highly inappropriate. So hopefully now you can start to see what's going on here. To Morrison and Brushy Bill and the law firm, this is a serious legal matter. But to the governor and those around him, it's just an opportunity to get some press. And because of Mabry's actions, the story is now in the press, and everybody's trying to dive into it and try to get in on it. Just like that idiot's trying to say, I was there when Garrett killed him. Everybody wants to be in on this. So again, because of his actions, the public is already suspicious and thinks that maybe this is a publicity stunt or a hoax. They're thinking, well, okay, you're trying to tell me there's this huge 100th anniversary celebration, which already sounds lame. And they're going to reenact Billy the Kid being killed. And it's this weekend. But the day before, all of a sudden, you're going to interview the real Billy the Kid and he's going to show up there. Like, you're trying to drive attendance, maybe. This has to be a hoax, right? This is just a publicity stunt. This isn't like a serious thing. And it says in the article that they thought that the Centennial Committee was behind this whole situation. And they had to say, no, we have nothing to do with it. But we do want to exploit it, though. We want to jump in on it. So that's what people were thinking. Now, we started this presentation with how they tried to spin this in the papers after the meeting. And bad people always accuse the good people of what they do. They don't expect anybody to actually look beyond the headline and like do a little digging and find out what the truth is. So after the governor's going to deny this pardon, the papers are going to run out and people will say it was a hoax. The law firm and Brushy wanted the publicity. But if you look at the actual articles before the governor failed to act on the pardon, it's obvious what's going on. And it's also obvious that exactly the opposite was true. But not everybody was thinking there's a hoax. There were people thinking other things also, as human beings do. And some of those people were thinking about exactly what I said earlier. And they're thinking, hey, wait a minute. This guy's a wanted fugitive. This guy's a cop killer. Why aren't we arresting this guy? And the answer to that question was easy. You can't arrest him because we don't know who he is. His lawyers haven't given us his name, his identity, his address, nothing. So you can't arrest him. And then they said, all right, I'll tell you what we should do then. Let's arrest his lawyers for harboring a fugitive, and we'll force him to tell us, and then we should arrest him. Now, allow me to share with you an article from the El Paso Herald-Post on November 27, 1950, with the headline, Sheriff Plans a Pinch in the Billy the Kid Case. And if you're not familiar with 1950s slang, a pinch is getting arrested. The article reads as follows. Sheriff Joe Campbell shoved his pearl-handled six-gun squarely into the Billy the Kid mystery today. He said he will arrest attorneys for the man who claims to be Billy the Kid if New Mexico authorities ask him to do so. The charge would be harboring a criminal. Quote, anyone who has knowledge of a killer's whereabouts, even if he is the criminal's lawyer, is an accessory to the crime, end quote, says Sheriff Campbell. Quote, anyone who knowingly harbors a murderer ought to be arrested, end quote. Well, that's interesting because Sheriff Pat Garrett didn't feel the same way. His old brother-in-law was hiding Billy the Kid in Fort Sumner. I wonder if Sheriff Joe Campbell knows that, number one, which I'm sure he didn't, and two, what his opinion would be if he knew that Pat Garrett let his own brother-in-law go. The article continues. He wants New Mexico action, but bemoaned Sheriff Campbell, his hands are tied. I talked to District Attorney Clayton about forcing these lawyers who say they know where Billy the Kid is to show their hand, he said. And he said we can't do a thing unless the New Mexico authorities request us to pick them up. If we do get a request from New Mexico officials, though, we'll rack these lawyers up and make them put up or shut up. I've been thinking about this case. Everybody knows Billy the Kid was a killer, and they know he's under a death sentence for killing a man. I mean, this is the sheriff, right? This is the sheriff with a bunch of deputies and the power of the sheriff's office behind him. But the prosecutor's not interested. Quote, if this William Henry Roberts is really Billy the Kid, he should be made to face justice. If he can't be found, those who are harboring him should be arrested and forced to tell where he is. William E. Clayton, the district attorney, though, said his office is not interested in this case. We have made no investigation of the reports that say the kid's alive, he said. He reported his office has not been asked by New Mexico authorities to investigate the reports that Billy is alive in Texas. Quote, the whole thing has me puzzled, he said. And then it goes on to talk about the Ralph Seitzinger centennial visit and other things. And it is funny because there's another paragraph that says, quote, there have always been persistent reports that the man whom Sheriff Pat Garrett killed in the flaming gun battle in Lincoln, New Mexico, nearly 70 years ago was not Billy the Kid. All right. So again, I just love to hammer that because people do, nobody ever questioned Garrett, which is obviously total baloney. So again, real world 1950. You have the sheriff saying not only should Billy the Kid be arrested, which they knew would happen, which is why they made sure the governor agreed to the condition that Brushy Bill wouldn't be arrested. But he's saying now not only should Billy the Kid be arrested, but the lawyers representing him should be arrested if they don't give up his whereabouts. Serious stuff. Now, despite all this, things are actually going pretty well from the perspective of Mr. Morrison and Brushy Bill. I mean, they only had 3 conditions. And yes, the governor had renegotiated the first one, and they're now had to present Brushy Bill in person to be met. But they're still not going to tell you his name, his address, stuff like that. So there's not really that big of a concession to make. After all, you need the governor to give you the pardon. So you got to work, you got to negotiate, or you're not going to get anything. On the point of no publicity, yes, the governor broke his promise. He literally announced it to the press. And Morrison knew this. By the time the day of the meeting comes around, November 30th, this had been out for about a week at this point. But maybe to the governor's credit, he didn't tell him when he was meeting this guy, and he didn't really give him any specific details. So, okay, maybe somebody in his office leaked it or whatever. It's not what we talked about. But again, okay. So now let's go to November 30th, 1950, the day of the meeting. And Morrison and Brushy Bill go to a restaurant for breakfast. And I want to talk about the 3 conditions again. He's going to remain anonymous and no publicity. He's not going to be arrested, and he wants a pardon. Now, they had already negotiated the first condition, and they said, okay, we'll let you meet him, but we're still not going to tell you his address. We're not going to tell you who he is, but we'll let you meet him and talk to him, no problem. They had to give something up in this negotiation because they need the governor to give the pardon. So far, Mabry hasn't really broken his promise. Then on November 24th, he blabs it to the whole press, gives away the names of the witnesses and all that. That is clearly a violation of the conditions that he agreed to. However, you'll notice he didn't give the date of the meeting, and they still don't know the petitioner's name, and they still don't know where he lives or any of that. So yes, it was inappropriate. Yes, he broke his promise, but some of what they wanted is still intact as far as the first condition. The second condition, he's not going to be arrested. Well, he wasn't arrested. So far, so good. So yeah, even though Sheriff Campbell's coming out, the good news is the FBI says we're not really interested. The prosecutor, district attorney says we're not really interested. Okay, that one's still pretty good. The third condition, he gets a pardon, is to be seen. So far on the morning of November 30th, it's not that bad. It still seems like, okay, this is a little uncomfortable because he wasn't supposed to do that, but so far so good. But if you read Morrison's book, Alias, Billy the Kid, he says that morning at breakfast, he's reading the paper and, quote, it was the next paragraph which took away Morrison's appetite, end quote. And if you actually go back and read that paragraph, it says a few things. But what I want to focus on is the line that says, quote, Mabry said the El Paso law firm said it did not want its client molested by reporters, but the governor said reporters would not be barred from the meeting and could question the aged man after the official interview, end quote. Wait a minute. Now that's different. Now they actually do know when the meeting is being held, and he intends to invite them to the meeting and let them question Brushy Bill. And that, my friends, was a party foul. And that is the exact moment that Mr. Morrison realized that this is a setup. And Mr. Morrison actually wanted to cancel the meeting based on this. The governor very, very clearly had broken his promise. But Mabry, if nothing else, was a sneaky bastard. First, he says, if you want me to pardon this guy, I got to meet him. And he draws him in. Then he says, we'll do it at my house, and it'll be private. Nobody will know, okay? Draws him in. And then the day of the meeting, he announces, no, everybody's going to be there. And that was not agreed upon. Newspaper also reveals that morning that there's going to be a lot of other people, not just historians, but also family members of Pat Garrett and Kip McKinney and the grandson of Sheriff William Brady. Now, I don't know what the point of that would be. On one hand, we could argue, okay, nowadays it's common victim statements and you get to appear in court and you get to look the guy in the eye and say, you evil bastard, you killed my grandpa. But that's not what's going on here, okay? For one, Arcadio Brady, whatever, was not even born until 30 years after his grandfather was killed. So, but could he be a victim and be there? Okay, but that's not what this is, okay, number one. He could get his statement privately, whatever, or he could even be there. So you could even give him a pass and say, well, okay, I understand why Arcadio Brady is there. Why would Garrett's sons be there? And why would McKinney's sons be there? They didn't know Billy the Kid. They didn't have any firsthand knowledge. And how awkward is that for the petitioner? So it's like, oh, yeah, your dad's a liar. Your dad's a liar. Oh, hey, Arcadio Brady. Yeah, I killed your grandfather. I shot him in the back. Yeah, nice to meet you guys. Great. Good to see you. I mean, very, very, very awkward and very, very, very inappropriate. So Morrison wants to pull the plug. He's so upset. He can't eat. He goes to the phone and he calls the governor. Now, the governor, again, Mabry was a sly dude. He says he had to give the press a statement, but look, I'm still going to give you the private interview. Just come early. Okay, yeah, so they're going to be at the 10 o'clock meeting. We had scheduled it for 10, and you're right. My bad. They're going to be at the 10 o'clock. I'm sorry. I had to give him a statement. It blew up. I tried to, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Come early. Just come 20 minutes early. We'll still do the private meeting, and then, you can either sneak out or whatever, but come early. And I personally think that at that point, he was just willing to say whatever he needed to say. Because if Morrison and Billy the Kid didn't show up, he's the one that's going to look like a dipshit. Because he had wasted everybody's time. He created this whole media circus. He brought all these people in from all over the state, historians. There's over 50 people here, according to many accounts. So he has to say, look, I'm sorry, this is a mistake. Yeah, I'll still give you the private meeting. But he had no intention of doing that. So for his part, Mr. Morrison, he has mixed feelings. He knows this is a setup, but you need a pardon. And the only way to get the pardon is to move forward. So he keeps the appointment. And we can all look backwards and say, well, maybe he should have pulled the plug and wait for the next governor or whatever. But what if the next governor didn't want to take the meeting? Like, this was his chance. He had worked for a year and a half at his own expense. He had all the stuff ready. Brushy Bill was ready. We got to go for it. Okay. And now for years, I actually thought that Morrison, the governor, and Brushy Bill were supposed to be the only three people in the room. That's not the case. I see now in Mr. Morrison's papers, he actually did agree to have historians there. And it's well known that Mr. Morrison corresponded with not only a lot of historians, but actually a lot of participants or descendants of participants in the Lincoln County War. Paul Blazer is one. The son of Judge Wilson is another. And Mr. Morrison was interested in evidence and the facts. The problem was a lot of times the historians had facts that were wrong, as we just heard earlier, where it says, well, legend says he's left-handed, legend said he was born in New York, etc. And we're going to talk about some of that. But historians were not a problem. What was a problem was having reporters in the meeting and also having family members who had no firsthand knowledge in the meeting. And the only reason those people would be there is because this was a publicity stunt by the governor. But let's talk about the governor for a second. I mean, what's the deal with this guy? And it's kind of a tough one because he's very unremarkable in many ways. And now we started this presentation with an article, which I think is an example of how you can make something sound however you want it to. So, you could write a resume for this guy. I mean, he was the Chief Justice of the New Mexico Supreme Court. He was governor. He had public service for 18 years. But what was he really like? And if you do some research on this guy, you're going to find out he was very, very unpopular. And my opinion is he's just another bureaucrat politician and kind of a pompous ass. I mean, let's face it. The only thing that he's known for is this meeting with Brushy Bill. He only served one term as governor. He was very unpopular during his term. The guy that ran on his party's ticket lost supposedly because he was affiliated with him. And not only that, but everybody hated the people that he appointed to office. And I also find it interesting that when he met with Brushy Bill, he was in the last few days, not only of his term as governor, but also of his entire political career. He was done. He's now 64 years old. He had been in public service for 18 years, and he's heading back into private law practice with his sons in less than 30 days. It was also the holiday season. We had just finished Thanksgiving a week before, and the newspaper said he had been sick for an entire week prior to this meeting. And so I'm thinking of that circumstance. And you know what I thought of? And this is just me. I thought of when you go into a restaurant like 20 or 30 minutes before they close, and they tell you the kitchen's closed, right? You ever have that happen to you? And I'm not talking about coming in like 5 minutes before, because that's rude. I worked in restaurants for a long time. When people come in 5 minutes before closing, I mean, but you still got to feed them. You're supposed to be open until you close. So that's what I thought of whenever I read about Thomas Mabry coming off this sickness, end of his political career. I mean, what did he have to gain? On top of all that, he was related to Walter Noble Burns, whose whole reputation was based on what he said about Billy the Kid. And now the real Billy the Kid shows up and says, "Oh, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong." Maybe he would prove that Shotgun Collins didn't toss all night in nervous restlessness. I mean, you can't have that. So I don't know. Was that a factor? It seems like maybe it was. Was he thinking like, "Oh man, if I pardon this guy, I'm going to be swamped"? But don't get me wrong. I think he tested the waters. Like, what can I get out of this? He leaked it to the public. He created a media circus to see if he could get anything out of it. But really, the best that came out of it was a possible appearance at a lame 3-day centennial celebration in El Paso. Nah, not that interesting. Not going to take any action. I don't think this guy's Billy the Kid. Let me enjoy my holidays. Not saying I'm exactly right on that, but that's the impression I got. And I found what may be the last article on Mabry that was published, or one of the last articles that was published on him, just a few days before he left office. And the article reads, quote, "Mabry shows strain as he prepares to retire," end quote. And here's the article. Thomas J. Mabry steps down as governor Sunday with a smile on his face and a twinkle in his blue eyes, but the lines in his forehead show him a tired man. After 18 continuous years in New Mexico public office, the 64-year-old Mabry joins his two sons in law practice in Albuquerque with just a little bit of relief. Quote, "I've enjoyed the last 4 years," he said, "but the best time I ever had was when I was on the Supreme Court. That was really fun." Mabry retired from the state Supreme Court bench in 1944 after 7 years and 3 months in run for governor. He was elected to succeed J.J. Dempsey, who was named to Congress last November. But prior to his stint in the Supreme Court bench, Mabry was a district attorney and district judge at Albuquerque. A member of the state constitutional convention at 24 years old, Mabry also was a member from the first state senate from Clovis. Those close to Mabry say that few people realize the strain he has been under, especially the past 2 years when Mrs. Mabry fell in Albuquerque in November 1948 and broke his hip. Okay, look, there's a lot more here, but it's obvious this guy is a career politician. And his administration really wasn't remarkable at all. And I find it interesting that the reason he's particularly under strain is because his wife broke her hip. And then he says, during the first 2 years, Mrs. Mabry held open house at the mansion every week, and she really enjoyed it. But these past 2 years, well, it's been hard for her. And I'm thinking, you poor, poor bastard. But despite criticism of his administration from many quarters, Mabry himself is pretty well satisfied. I don't really care what the public thinks. It's all about me. Typical career politician. There's about 65 newspapers in the state, the governor pointed out, and I've had substantial support from all but about 10. I think that's a darn good record. A former newspaperman himself, when he came to Clovis in 1907, Mabry said he feels he understands newspapers pretty well, and he says he has no hard feelings for any newsman or newspaper who has denounced him. So he understands it pretty well, which maybe is why he leaked all the secret, confidential evidence for his client who was under a death sentence to the frickin' press. So anyway, that's their business, he said. For the constructive criticisms, I'm truly grateful. He had no comment on reports that John E. Miles was defeated for governor to succeed him because Miles' name was linked with the Mabry administration. But Mabry indicated he didn't agree. So, like, well, you think this guy lost because, people hate you? He's like, no, I don't think that's true, but I don't really have any comment. It is pretty well known among political observers that Mabry chose to support Miles when it came to be a choice between Miles and David Chavez when Miles defeated him in the primary. And then Mabry's support wasn't particularly strong. Oh, I'm going to support you, man. I got you. You're in my administration. I'm going to support. Yeah, I am for Miles. Absolutely. But then his support wasn't strong. This guy makes promises, doesn't keep his promises. He's lukewarm, career politician. I don't like this guy. Don't know this guy. Nothing personal, but what I'm reading about him seems to support what I already kind of thought based on how he treated Mr. Morrison. How much criticism detected against men he has appointed? Well, maybe I should have made one or two changes that I didn't make, he answered. I believe that if a man's a good administrator, he should be supported and given a free hand, even though he may be unpopular. Mabry says, as far as he knows, there was no dishonesty during his administration. I don't know. I don't think there's anything dishonest. But Mabry came in for strong criticism by retaining State Police Chief Hubert Beasley after he was indicted and convicted of torture. So the State Police Chief is not only indicted, but convicted of torture, and he doesn't fire the guy. So he comes under heavy criticism for that. He comes under heavy criticism for not firing Victor Salazar, former revenue commissioner, who was unpopular with many of the State House crowd, and by keeping a number of other department heads. Quote, I think the people generally are satisfied with my administration, end quote, the governor declared. I've tried to do my best job. What a jackass. No offense. I'm sure this guy has relatives somewhere, but this is the guy that turned a legitimate petition for pardon by an old man who wanted to die a free man, who was screwed over by a previous governor, and he turned it into a media circus that resulted in him having a stroke and dying less than 30 days later. And I find it very interesting that on this same page, in this very same newspaper, there's an article that says, Billy the Kid is Heiko heart victim. And now this article is, again, right before Mabry leaves office, now Tuesday, December 28th, 1950. And it says, Heiko, Texas, Brushy Bill Roberts died Wednesday with his boots on and far from the frontier that he had claimed he roamed as Billy the Kid. The aged cowboy dropped dead of a heart attack as he walked the streets of Heiko. He was dressed, as always, in a fringed frontier shirt, cowboy hat, and boots. He was known here as O.L. Roberts, Brushy Bill Roberts, but he had claimed he was really Billy the Kid, the bold young desperado who has become an American legend. Governor T.J. Mabry of New Mexico recently refused Roberts' plea for a pardon of Billy the Kid. Roberts claimed the story of the kid's death at the hands of Chef Pat Garrett at Fort Sumner, New Mexico, was just a legend. The accepted story is that the kid, or William H. Bonney, was killed by Garrett in a rooming house. The man who died here told people he was 90 years old. He said he and his wife moved down here from Gladewater, Texas, a dozen years ago. Literally next to Mabry's article about how, his hasn't had much fun as governor and that his wife broke her hip and it's been really hard on him. And, he can't do the weekly social events they used to do at the governor's house. Like, what a complete and total pompous jackass, in my humble opinion. You have no conscience that Brushy Bill Roberts died because of the stupid stunt that you pulled to turn it into a media circus. Nothing whatsoever. You don't think, like, I could have done that differently. Guy's 90, I fired a bunch of questions at him and all this stuff, caused a media circus, and poor guy thought he's going to be arrested, whatever. Nothing. So anyway, not a huge fan of Governor Thomas Mabry, although I never met the guy. But if I wanted to meet the guy and I had a time machine, I could do that. And I know exactly when I would go back in time to meet this dude. And I would go back to May 23rd, 1948, and I would go to the State College. And I'd go there because not only would Governor Mabry be there that day, but a good buddy of his named General Patrick Hurley, who used to be the Secretary of War. And again, this was 1950. You got World War II, you got the Korean War. This is big stuff. So General Patrick Hurley, who considered himself an expert in Lincoln, New Mexico, by the way, he's a buddy, and he was actually invited and attended the meeting with Brushy Bill Roberts that day, along with 50 other people. So I don't know if you know that, but General Patrick Hurley was at the governor's mansion when Brushy Bill went for his pardon. But he was also with Governor Thomas Mabry 2 years prior on May 23rd, 1948, at the State College. And you know why they were there? to support the Las Cruces Youth Recreation Program barbecue and rally. These two esteemed, powerful men spent all frickin' day at $1 a person barbecue so they could give 5-minute campaign speeches to get elected. And yet, when the time came to consider the claims of Brushy Bill Roberts, who claimed to be Billy the Kid, they gave it less than 20 minutes. If anything, illustrates the priorities of career politicians versus what could potentially be the interest of history or people, I think that does it. So, it's time to get into the actual meeting of what happened at the governor's mansion. Morrison calls the governor, complains that he broke his promise. Governor says, come 20 minutes early. I'm so sorry. I'll give you the private meeting. Morrison and Roberts arrive 20 minutes early, as discussed, and they sneak in through the kitchen entrance. And the governor meets them and leads them into a big hallway where Brushy can see the mob of more than 50 people that had gathered to gawk at him like a sideshow freak. He's introduced to the sons of Pat Garrett, the sheriff of Carlsbad, and a lot of other people. And cameras, people start crowding in and taking pictures and firing questions at him. So now he wanted to be anonymous. The governor promised no photos, no publicity until after I act on the pardon. And now you have all these random strangers firing questions at him, and it quickly becomes obvious things were not going to go down the way they were supposed to go down. This meeting was not being taken seriously by the governor, and the petition for pardon packet and evidence that was so carefully prepared by Mr. Morrison wasn't even looked at. It was accepted by the governor and placed aside. Now, as I mentioned, among the crowd were two of Pat Garrett's sons, Kip McKinney's son, the grandson of Sheriff William Brady, as well as many, many others that were hostile to the idea that someone would challenge the widely held belief that Pat Garrett had killed Billy the Kid 70 years earlier in 1881. When the governor introduced Roberts to the sheriff of Carlsbad, the sheriff of Carlsbad tried to intimidate him by using the old cop trick. And my uncle was a deputy U.S. Marshal and Florida State Trooper. I've been around this stuff my whole life. But he used the old cop trick that I've been watching you, and I know you've been in my county recently. Brushy then looks over and notices that two armed state troopers had taken up positions at the door, which he interprets as blocking him from exiting. He then becomes positive he's going to be arrested just like the newspapers had said, and he thinks he's made a big mistake. Here he had been hiding quietly from a death sentence for more than 70 years, and now when he finally thought he's going to get the pardon he was promised and set the record straight, he instead expected to be arrested and ultimately to be executed. So Brushy goes shaky, and the governor has to escort him into his office so he can lay down, and he stays in there for 20 minutes trying to recover. Now, like Brushy Bill, Morrison knew at that point he had been suckered. Governor Mabry never intended to give Brushy a fair hearing, and he had no interest whatsoever in the evidence that Morrison had brought. After about 20 minutes, Brushy Bill somewhat recovered, and the humiliation continued. He was paraded into a large hall where they sat him at a table and allowed everyone to pepper him with ridiculous questions like, who was the name of your first school teacher and how many girlfriends did you have? There was no consideration of his peculiar physical characteristics, the fact that he matched Billy the Kid down to his boot size, that he was ambidextrous, and that he could slip handcuffs, or any of that. Now, if you noticed, there's no private meeting that the governor promised them for coming 20 minutes early. They never got it. Yes, the governor was alone with Roberts in his study for 20 minutes, but that's while Brushy Bill was laying down trying to recover from his medical emergency. There was no attorney-client governor meeting where they look at the evidence like they had discussed. Nothing. Eventually, Mabry comes out. As soon as Brushy Bill feels stable enough to come back out, they put him at a table and give him some water, and everybody starts firing questions at him. Mabry watches this for a few minutes and then finally says, all right, fun's over. I'm not pardoning this guy. I don't think he's Billy the Kid. Now, let me be clear. It's certainly his right to decide this case any way he wanted to. But that doesn't change the fact that the way he handled the whole thing was contrary to the promises that he made. First, he broke his word and leaked everything to the press, including the names of the witnesses. Second, he allowed reporters and family members to be present. And later, I'm going to show you that he refused to give Morrison back his original petition files. He said he had to keep them in the official records, and when really, he probably just threw them in the trash, but we're going to get to that. And then there was no private meeting like he had promised. The only promise he actually kept was that Brushy Bill wasn't arrested. So the newspapermen rush to the phones, back to their papers, and they write the headlines like I showed you. Billy the Kid bubble bursts as governor rejects oldster's claim. And I want to revisit that article because in that article, the reporter explains so that you will know why nobody at the governor's mansion that day believed Brushy Bill Roberts. He gave us 8 reasons. I mean, you can't say they didn't tell you why. I mean, what more can we do? We brought in all the experts, all the historians, and I told you why we didn't think he's Billy the Kid. Like, what more do you want? Stop begging. Brushy Bill Roberts was not Billy the Kid. Here's the reasons. Over. Don't look any further. Don't think about it. It's over. That's what they want to happen. But that's not what's going to happen. So here's the reasons. Reason number 1. Brushy Bill Roberts could not remember Pat Garrett's name without being prompted by Morrison. Number 2, he didn't know much about the Lincoln County War. Number 3, he didn't know the names of the important leaders of the Lincoln County War or how the factions lined up. Number 4, he referred to Billy the Kid as he sometimes, and then other times he said I. Number 5, he said he was born in Buffalo Gap when it's well established that Billy the Kid was born in New York. Number 6, he says he didn't kill anyone when he escaped jail. And history says he killed 2 guards and shot a third. Really? History says he shot a third? I don't know who that is. Maybe you guys do. I don't know. Number 7, he used his right hand and the sneaky detective people noticed it and he's supposed to be left-handed, but he used his right hand in handling his cane, drinking water, and buttoning his jacket, but Billy the Kid, according to history, was left-handed. He refused to answer questions about being wounded at Mockingbird Gap and Stinking Springs. Got it. Now, okay, I don't know about you, but I always find it interesting how people can write things a certain way to make it sound good or bad. And I guess the good news is that this is as bad as they can try to make it. And when you read this article, understanding how things really went down and what really happened that day, you can kind of see how they're trying to make it sound bad. So let's start with the obvious things that historians thought were true in 1950 based on the legend, but we now know aren't true, like Billy the Kid was left-handed. And why that's important is because if Brushy Bill were to tell them that it's not true back then they're going to say he's not Billy the Kid. And so right away you can see if he doesn't agree with the phony stories that had been told for 70 years in the books, they're not going to agree that he's Billy the Kid. This wasn't about the truth. There wasn't a single person there that could judge whether or not Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. Not a single old timer. There's no Severo Gallegos, no Martil Abel, none of the many other people that were still alive at that time. Okay, let's start with number 1. He couldn't remember Pat Garrett's name and had to be prompted by Morrison. Now, this is how sneaky the critics are. What the article says is he couldn't remember and had to be prompted. Just like everybody does at some point. We're like, what's that actress's name? Oh my God, she's in that movie. I can see her face. Scarlett Johansson. I remembered. Okay, that's normal. That happens all the time. And they obviously know that. So what they do is they don't say Brushy Bill couldn't remember Pat Garrett's name. They say it differently and say, Brushy Bill didn't even know who Pat Garrett was. That's not what it said. They didn't say Brushy Bill didn't know who Pat Garrett was. Like he's sitting at the governor's mansion and they say, hey, remember Pat Garrett? And he goes, who? Pat Garrett? No, who's that? I don't know who Pat Garrett is. It's not what he said. They're talking. And he's like, well, you know, I was talking to what's Pat Garrett? Oh, yeah, Pat Garrett, obviously. I mean, that's how people talk. Matter of fact, if you listen to the interview of Shotgun John Collins' son, he's talking about Pete Maxwell. And he's talking to the guy and he's like, Billy Kid was out with that guy who got the land grant. And he goes, oh, I know his name as well as mine. And the guy goes, Maxwell. Yeah, Pete Maxwell. Obviously. So again, you take that and say, well, he couldn't remember Pat Garrett's name and had to be prompted by Morrison. That at least is honest. Like that's what happened. He couldn't remember Pat Garrett's name and Morrison says Garrett. Oh yeah, Pat Garrett. But these people will try to change it and say, Brushy Bill didn't even know who Pat Garrett was. Never heard of him. He never heard of Pat Garrett. Now, how could he be Billy Kid if he didn't know who Pat Garrett was? Totally different, man. Come on, bro. Horrible, horrible, horrible dishonesty. So please, that's not what it says. Totally ridiculous. This is a non-issue. All right, so we're off to a great start already. Here's number 2. Ready? He didn't know much about the Lincoln County War because they said so. That's it. No elaboration. So how am I supposed to make an opinion on whether or not he knew a lot about the Lincoln County War? Now, again, remember, University of New Mexico Press looked at this stuff. A lot of people met with Brushy Bill. C.L. Sonderson met him. R.L. Roberts met. A lot of these people met him, talked to him. Severo Gallegos talked to him. He knew a lot about the Lincoln County War. Matter of fact, he knew things about the Lincoln County War that the historians didn't know. But in this newspaper, he didn't know much about the Lincoln County War. No details, no nothing. So we can take their word for it. All right. I don't know what I can do with that one because there's nothing there. We're great. Two completely meaningless arguments about Brushy Bill Roberts and why he couldn't be Billy the Kid. Got it. So let's try the third one. Number 3. He didn't know the names of the important leaders of the Lincoln County War or how the factions lined up. Got it. Again, no details. But my question is, did he not know the names of the important leaders, or did he not know who the historians thought were the important leaders? Because I just listened to Amelia Church, eyewitness to the shooting of William Brady. And she's talking about how in the 1950s, these freaking historians were trying to tell her what happened when she was there and saw it with her own eyes. And they didn't believe her. So like Brushy Bill Roberts didn't know the names of who the historians said were the important leaders of the Lincoln County War. Because, you know, academics would be like, well, you know, Tom Catrone was the faction with the Murphy Dolan. How the hell would he know that? I mean, maybe he did know that. Actually, I think he knew a lot if you just go back and read what he says. But if you're talking about all the governmental players that weren't on the ground, you know, how would he know that? You hear things, but McSween started with the Dolans and moved over to Tunstall, and this was a fluid situation. So historians think they know all this stuff, but to think that Brushy Bill couldn't be Billy the Kid because he didn't cite the catechism of religious faith that the historians had settled on at that time, which has since changed as we got new information, it's really ridiculous. So, okay, we're 3 for 3 here. Number 4, Brushy Bill Roberts sometimes referred to Billy the Kid as he, and other times referred to Billy the Kid as I. Now, of all the 8 reasons why the media at the time said that Brushy Bill couldn't be Billy the Kid, I find reason number 4 to be the most offensive of all of them. How dare they? Brushy Bill Roberts sometimes referring to Billy the Kid as he, and other times referred to the Billy the Kid as I. That's his pronouns. I mean, if Brushy Bill wants his pronouns to be he and I, what's wrong with that? Who are you to judge it? But I can tell you this, the way they're describing him speaking is exactly how he spoke, and exactly how many old timers would speak also. If you read his letters to Mr. Morrison, he'll say things like, Billy Kid wasn't killed like they say. It's a manner of speaking. It's not that he was faking it and forgot he was supposed to be playing the part of Billy the Kid. And so he's talking about he whenever he really meant me. So these people are really stretching. And by the way, how do they know Billy the Kid's pronouns? Did they write him down? Did he wear a little name tag and say, Billy the Kid, my pronouns are he, I? I don't know. Did he have a LinkedIn profile where his pronouns are like Billy the Kid, he, I? I don't think so. Next, he said he was born in Buffalo Gap, but everybody knows it's well established he's born in New York City. All right. This gives me really, really great joy to share with you. Wrong. Absolutely, completely wrong. It is not well established. And before anybody runs out and says, it is well established, everybody knows he's born in New York City, you may want to run out and pick up a copy of The West of Billy the Kid by none other than the greatest Billy the Kid historian, Fred Nolan. And I actually mean that. I'm not being sarcastic. Fred Nolan is the man. He found Tunstall's letters in England. He is the man. Fred Nolan is an honest historian and an amazing historian, and I love him. So you go to that book and you go to chapter 1, page 1, where Frederick Nolan himself says, quote, if the records are to be trusted, however, Billy the Kid neither was born in nor ever lived in New York, city or state, nor did his father die there. Meticulous line-by-line examination of 1860 census records for the 59 counties of New York State has produced no configuration of a father, mother, and 2 sons named McCarty matching or even resembling the one sought. An 1860 Manhattan census showing Patrick, 30, Catherine, 29, Bridget, 7, and Henry McCarthy, with an H, the latter just 1 year old, has tempted many to accept it as the genuine article. Quite apart from the misspelled surname, however, it requires us to accept wishful thinking because Henry is 1 year old, therefore it fits the entirely unproven proposition that he was born in 1859. Everything else must be correct. Exactly. They take one thing and friggin' run with it. Love you, Fred Nolan. But if it is, what happened to Bridget? Why is Catherine's age given incorrectly? And what happened to the father? Careful search of available New York records for an appropriate McCarthy death, either Bridget or Patrick, between 1860 and 1867, has produced not a single possible candidate, end quote. So here you go. Yet another well-established fact, supposedly, that Brushy Bill contradicted during his meeting at the governor's office, which proved he couldn't be Billy the Kid, is wrong. And Fred Nolan calls BS on the temptation of some historians to take a single supposedly matching data point and run with it to the detriment of many other contradictory data points. He's absolutely correct. Finally, an honest historian. I can't recommend this guy enough based on what I read in his book. And this may surprise you, but I just read it. I've never read Fred Nolan's book. And I actually spoke to his wife one time. Awesome lady. I think this guy was awesome. I wish I could have known him personally, but I wasn't able to. I did talk to his wife while he was alive, but sadly, he wasn't in a condition to chat with me. And this may surprise you, but in reading his book for the first time recently, he and I agree on a whole lot of things. And I had never read his book before. I find that interesting. So Brushy can't be Billy the Kid because he doesn't agree with us that the kid was born in New York. Got it. They're wrong. Number 6, he wouldn't admit to murdering 2 policemen in front of 50 people. Okay, boy, that's a slam dunk. That's proof he wasn't Billy the Kid. Really? You think that's like, well, he said he didn't do any shooting that day. He just rode off. What do you expect him to say? That he killed 2 people in front of the sheriff of Carlsbad, all these police officers, 2 state troopers, the governor? Yeah, I killed those guys. Of course, he's not going to say that. We're running out of points here, folks. We're running out of points. Number 7, he used his right hand a lot when he's supposed to be left-handed. I mean, really? You don't think Billy the Kid has a functioning right hand? I don't want to give away my secrets. I eat left-handed, and I'm not left-handed. I'm right-handed. I'm somewhat ambidextrous. I'm not really. I can do some stuff. You know, I can shoot basketball left hand. I can shoot guns left hand a little bit. I'm no Billy the Kid, but you know, if you saw me eating, you might think I'm left-handed. This proves 0. Matter of fact, we now know the stupid tintype was flipped because these genius historians didn't realize the loading gate on the Winchester was backwards on the wrong side of the gun. So, okay, wow. He used his right hand a lot when he's supposed to be left-handed. Wrong, wrong, wrong. So he deserved to be humiliated because these dipsticks didn't understand what was going on. Horrible. Number 8, he wouldn't answer certain questions. Okay, so this is the 8 reasons that everybody thought he couldn't be Billy the Kid. Those are the 8. There's no more. Those are the ones they list. So these are the best ones they've got. Now, what's not mentioned in the article are the other more idiotic questions that they asked him that are recorded elsewhere. Questions like, who is your kindergarten teacher? Where are your teeth? And how many girlfriends did you have? I mean, these are the best historians in America, and they're going to get to the bottom of this, buddy. Let me tell you what. They're going to find out how many girlfriends Billy the Kid had. So wait, what's the right answer? We had 7, and it was Sally and Susie, but really? What? She wasn't really a girlfriend. I mean, we went on a couple times. Wait, is that the level of detail they're going to get into? Like arguing with Brushy Bill? Actually, this reminds me, there's a great Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Seinfeld and my favorite comedian ever, Norm Macdonald. And Norm Macdonald says to Jerry Seinfeld, well, you know, you don't have kids, so you wouldn't know. And Jerry goes, what are you talking about? I have kids. And he goes, what do you mean you have kids? And he goes, I have kids. I have a son and a daughter, whatever he has. Norm Macdonald goes, well, we can agree to disagree. right? So and it was all a setup, right? He set him up, and then Jerry laughs because that's pretty funny, actually. So what are they going to argue with him? Like, we can agree to disagree how many kids you have. We're going to agree to disagree to how many girlfriends you have. Completely ridiculous. But yet these are the people that get to decide whether or not Brushy Bill Roberts is Billy the Kid. But remember, the critics say Brushy was just an idiot. I mean, he didn't know anything. And the logical fallacy of critics claiming that Brushy Bill was coached by Mr. Morrison and or he learned what he knew from books, but then whenever he got in front of the governor, actually didn't know anything at all, always struck me as like obvious. You can't have it both ways. You have to remember that what ended up in Alias Billy the Kid was peer reviewed. And C.L. Sonneson and the University of New Mexico Press confirm that Brushy Bill knew things that were not widely known and only proven to be true later. He personally met with Sonneson and also the attorneys of the law firm that took his case. He did know things that weren't widely known. There's no evidence of fraud whatsoever with Mr. Morrison, yet there are still those with no evidence that claim that Brushy Bill was a hoax or a fraud. So what actually happened at the governor's mansion that day? I mean, if Brushy Bill was really Billy the Kid, wouldn't he have been able to turn the tables on these guys, even though they were a hostile crowd? I mean, it's an interesting thought, right? But did he turn the tables the time he was railroaded in Donna Ana County and convicted of killing Sheriff Brady? Nope. In that case, the judge told the jury that he was to be found guilty even if he didn't pull the trigger, among other things. He was completely and totally railroaded and sentenced to death. So if he couldn't turn the tables when he was in perfect mind and body back in his 20s, why would we think he could do it now at 90 years old after the passing of 70 years? And I think the evidence shows he was railroaded once again, and he knew it. I also think the evidence shows very clearly that he was not in perfect physical condition, and that also played a role in how effective he was in responding to the complete clown show circus that he was thrown into the middle of without any advance warning. Not that it would have mattered, to be honest, because the outcome of this meeting was predetermined by Governor Mabry. But let me pause for a second. Regardless of what you think about his performance or what happened at the governor's mansion that day, I want to say something very, very, very clearly that is indisputable. It's literally impossible, based on the available evidence, for the case of Brushy Bill Roberts to be a hoax, in the sense of a coordinated hoax involving multiple people. It's impossible. Now, could Brushy Bill's claim of being Billy the Kid been a fraudulent claim? And so you may be able to say, well, Brushy Bill was a fraud. Yes, that's possible. There's no evidence for it at all. Matter of fact, the evidence is all to the contrary. But that is actually possible. Brushy could be a fraud. But this series of events could not be a hoax. A hoax, the way I'm using the term, is the execution of a fraud, a coordinated execution. It's a hoax. We're going to defraud people. We're going to commit a hoax together intentionally. That's not what happened. And there's zero evidence of it. So you don't have to believe that Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. He may or may not have been. But the idea that the attempt for a pardon was an intentional hoax that Morrison and the law firm knowingly participated in is literally impossible based on the available evidence. We have a lot of the private letters between Morrison and also a lot of letters between Morrison and a lot of other people. There's not the faintest hint of anything but a legitimate attempt to prove the identity of Brushy Bill Roberts as Billy the Kid. But I'll tell you where there is dishonesty and fraud. There's dishonesty and fraud in the promises of the governor, and dishonesty and fraud when someone says, nobody ever questioned Pat Garrett, or Brushy Bill didn't even know who Pat Garrett was, and all that nonsense. I'll also tell you something else, and that is that it is obvious and well established that Brushy Bill had a medical emergency while he was at the governor's mansion, and that it affected how he interacted with the historians and reporters. Again, not that it would have made any difference. This was rigged from the beginning. And just like a perfectly healthy Billy the Kid in his 20s couldn't talk himself out of a murder conviction in 1881, a perfectly healthy Billy the Kid couldn't have talked his way into a pardon in 1950. This was a publicity stunt by the governor, and he had never had any intention of granting this pardon. He didn't even look at the evidence or invite the witnesses. And the fact of history is that Brushy Bill Roberts did have a stroke at the governor's mansion that day. This isn't disputed by anybody who's credible. So when I reference that fact, the fact that Brushy Bill Roberts had a stroke in my book, I don't mention that to defend him or give excuses as to why he couldn't remember Garrett's name or that nonsense, or why he used his right hand to pick up his drinking glass. I use it to point out the character of the people that mock people that are suffering. I actually say that in the book. And I say, quote, to anyone with a conscience, this scene could only be described as extremely unfortunate and sad. To mock an elderly man who can't remember Pat Garrett's name or the places they asked him about because he's literally in the middle of a stroke is unconscionable. At this point, Brushy must have known that he couldn't win this battle, and unfortunately, neither his body or his psyche could handle the hostile crowd that faced him, end quote. So that's the point. The point is not on the technical nature of his medical emergency. We know he had one. We know he died 30 days later. So what happened at the governor's mansion that day is well established and not disputed, baby. It's not disputed by any credible historians. But that's not to say that we don't have other people that try to dispute it. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm proud to say we're approaching, I think, 54,000 followers on our social media page. We've got thousands in our private group, and we've got thousands that follow this YouTube channel. So thank you, thank you, thank you. But along with that, we actually get a lot of spam accounts and trolls posting internet scams on our social media. We'll get people, they'll join our group and they'll kind of lurk for months and then suddenly jump out. Yeah. Like, it's actually pretty funny. But they'll post, you know, this guy joined 2 years ago. He's been lurking the whole time. And all of a sudden he posts, my son died and I have to sell his Xbox to pay for funeral expenses. You know, those stupid posts where people are trying to scam people out of money. Or they'll say, free giveaway. The first person to tell me what color's the sky wins $100, you know, and you're like, I know, it's blue. Sky's blue. It's like, okay, private message me, right? It's totally scam. So you got to stay on top of that stuff, especially when you have, 50,000 different eyeballs and more on your social media pages. So we get all that stuff. And that's not unique to us. When you start to get followers, you're going to attract trolls. I got it. And so another aspect of that is we get people with not only fake accounts, but multiple fake accounts. And these people reply to their own comments, which is like the apex of lameness, right? Like this is like, if you're a lame-o, this is the peak of being, you're like King Lame-o if you're a person that does stuff like this. So I'll never forget the first time I saw it. I was on a Yahoo finance board looking at like Coca-Cola stock or something. And I see this thread that's like the most relevant, like you could sort by newest, most relevant, whatever. And it's got 48 replies to some comment and it's showing it as most relevant. So I see it, I was like, oh man, that must be interesting. So I look at the comment and the comment's something like, wow, this stock market is so crazy. I thought I knew what to do, but now I am not so sure. And then I see somebody responded to that comment, pretty, benign comment, like, stock market's crazy. I thought I knew what to do, but man, I'm really struggling. I don't know what to do. And some different person, same person, fake account, responds and says, I was just like you until I met Miss Penelope Jones. She has helped me recover all of my stock market losses. She is a real expert with stocks. And then another user chimes in on the same thread. This happens 48 times. And this person pretends like they're, totally independent, right? And they say, hey, I can't believe you guys are talking about Miss Penelope Jones. I have been with her for many years now and have always found great success. And this goes on, for 48 replies. And people are like, man, I'm very interested. Do you think Miss Penelope Jones can help me? How would I contact her? Oh, you contact her through WhatsApp, 0011 whatever. Okay, so total scammers. Everybody sees it. I can't believe it works. Maybe there's some idiot out there that gives your bank account information to people like this. And the reason I mentioned it is we get the same crap on my social media. So if I say I have a belt that broke on my washing machine, some moron will come on and say, I'm a Maytag repairman and that model washing machine doesn't have a belt. I mean, this one guy came on and said he was a photo expert with Kodak. And then he said he owns mining interests in this, like whatever he has to say to like pretend he's credible. We get it's total BS. These aren't real people. This dude is not a real Maytag repairman. This isn't a real academic dialogue. This is idiocy, okay? And in that context, sometimes things slip through because we delete that stuff. We try to ban those accounts. We try to get rid of those people as much as we can. But one time I get a comment that says, quote, "How do you know Brushy Bill had a stroke?" Which is not an unreasonable question. I mean, there's really no point to the question because we know he had a medical emergency and died 30 days later. So whether or not it was a stroke or something else doesn't really matter. But hey, people have a lot of questions. Their questions may not be your questions or my questions, but hey, no problem. It's okay to ask questions. I like it when people ask questions. But then right away, within like a few minutes, another person jumps in that a new account never seen before. And they post under the first guy and say, yeah, if Brushy had a stroke, why don't any of the newspaper people mention it? Now, I'm actually doing a disservice using a normal voice because really, I think this is a Miss Penelope Jones person. And then right after that, you get another Miss Penelope Jones person asking me if I have the MRI. And then they start listing the medical definition of a stroke. Okay, at this point, I know this is an obvious coordinated Miss Penelope Jones type thing. Totally dishonest, totally fake accounts, totally bad information. So I have no interest in responding to those comments or playing that game. But for the rest of you that may actually have a serious interest in the full story of what happened that day, and also to illustrate that these people continually jump out on my social media, yeah, trying to gotcha. And they do these spectacular face plants where they're completely blown away with primary evidence and they have no shame. Like it doesn't embarrass them. They're just going to keep jumping out and like, whoa, gotcha. So it's really just, it's not what we do, right? This is an academic discourse. But anyway, let me share an article with you from July 1981 issue of Field and Stream magazine where author E.B. Mann states the following, and this is in my book. Not really that hard to find. Quote, on November 29th, 1950, so he's a day off because it's November 30th, I was one of the 50 or more avid witnesses in the governor's mansion when Brushy Bill and his attorney appeared to plead their case. The little man was sick and scared. Small wonder that he was scared, confronted as he was by Pat Garrett's towering sons, Oscar and Jarvis, by clusters of state and local police, by yammering newsmen and flashing cameras. He denied knowledge of or gave wrong answers to the questions fired at him. And he finally collapsed and had to be carried from the room. The news media made a joke of it, and Governor Mabry denied action on the petition for pardon, quote, because I don't believe this man is Billy the Kid, end quote. No one could have believed it on the basis of the little man's performance, end quote. Okay, so that is E.B. Mann. And wait a minute, what did he say? He said, quote, the old man was sick and scared, and he finally collapsed, and had to be carried from the room. So if you don't know what collapsed means, he literally had to be carried from the room, end quote. So the fact that Brushy Bill Roberts had a medical emergency absolutely was mentioned by people that were there that day. Oh, if Mr. Robert have a stroke or a medical episode, how come no reporter mentioned? They did, dipshit. They totally did. These people have no idea what they're talking about. It definitely happened. It was definitely serious. Have you ever collapsed and had to be carried from the room? Not a lot of people have. I never have. I was actually trying to think of when I would have ever even seen something like this outside of like a football game or a sporting event injury where somebody gets hurt on the field and they got to carry them off. And all I could think of, and this isn't intended to be political in any way at all, but all I could think of is the famous time when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton collapsed at the 9/11 memorial. Remember that? They said she overheated or whatever, and they're taking her to the van, and she collapses right before she gets to the van. They literally have to pick her up and throw her in the van. And she loses her shoe, like her shoe's in the road. She's laying sideways in the van. Secret Service comes up to kind of block the camera. That's pretty bad when that happens. You have no control whatsoever. You're literally having to be manhandled to like be moved. Like that's pretty bad. Now, again, I'm not talking about the details of what happened with her, but I do know that's what a medical emergency looks like when you have to be helped out of the room. It's scary. You don't know what's going on. You know she's in trouble. But can you imagine watching that live on the news and some idiot jumps out and goes, yeah, hey, Hillary, who was your kindergarten teacher? Like, she's going to be able to like answer questions in that minute. Like, really? Come on. But these are the people like, he's fine. Just give him, prop him up there. Who is your girlfriend? Where's your born at? Where's your teeth at? Like, there's a certain personality of just bully that like bullies the special needs kids in school and, just a real scumbag person. And that's who I was talking about. Because back 10 years ago, 9 years ago, there were people like, ha ha, Brushy Bill didn't know nothing. He's such an idiot. It's like, you're literally like, do you not realize you're making fun of a 90-year-old senior citizen who's in the middle of a medical episode and you're like calling him dumbass, basically. So anyway, look, just my point of view. You don't have to agree with it, but the facts of history are Brushy Bill was in a bad way at the governor's mansion. So what does all that mean? All it means is that, like the idiot in class, the people that come up with these new asinine reasons to reject the claims of Brushy Bill completely waste everybody's time. These aren't historians. These are people that are trying to find things to discredit Brushy Bill Roberts on the internet, and they don't even think through their argument. This is like attacking me when I say they went to breakfast that morning. I'll probably get a comment, how do we know they went to breakfast that morning? And then another account, which is really the same person with another fake account, they'll reply to their own post and go, yeah, how do we know? Where's the receipt for breakfast? I mean, how come none of the servers said they saw them at breakfast that day? And then you get all these replies like, yeah, Mr. Morrison was so thorough. He probably would have, gotten a statement from like the server and maybe an affidavit from the cashier. And so these idiots expect me to run around chasing their idiot theories all day. It's not going to happen. Nobody on our social media wants to hear this stupid stuff. No, it's not real. Okay, they didn't go to breakfast that morning. You win. Like, what? Really? So please, EB Man says that Brushy Bill collapsed and had to be carried from the room. This was very clearly a medical emergency, and I hate to break it to the fans of Miss Penelope Jones and to the world, but it was also a stroke. And allow me to introduce you, my friends, if you are not familiar, to the transient ischemic attack, which according to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, a transient ischemic attack is a stroke. Yes, a stroke that lasts only a few minutes. It occurs when the blood supply to part of the brain is briefly interrupted, like, for example, and this isn't in the original, from a coronary occlusion. Remember that word because we're going to be coming back to it. But TIA symptoms, which usually occur suddenly, are similar to those of a stroke but do not last as long. Most symptoms of a TIA disappear within an hour, although they may persist for up to 24 hours. Symptoms can include numbness or weakness in the face, arm, or leg, especially on one side of the body, trouble seeing in one or both eyes, difficulty with walking, dizziness, confusion or difficulty in talking or understanding speech, and loss of balance and coordination. Huh. Sounds like what happened to Brushy Bill when he had to be carried from the room. Now, since 1950, the medical community has come a long way in diagnosing strokes. And they agree on many aspects, but you should know that even today, the work is not done. And it is still not completely universally agreed upon. So anyone that tells you otherwise and says that Brushy Bill couldn't have a stroke because here's the 5 things that have to happen, that's not a universal definition. They're lying to you, and better, they have no freaking idea what they're talking about. So although the term transient ischemic attack wasn't coined until a year later in 1951, what happened to Brushy Bill at the governor's mansion on November 30th, 1950, we now know with certainty was a transient ischemic attack brought on by a coronary occlusion, blockage of the artery. So there you go. Prior to the heart attack that killed him, Brushy gets excited at the governor's mansion. His heart can't keep up. He has a mini stroke, also called a transient ischemic attack, also called a stroke, and has to go lay down in the governor's office for 20 minutes. As his heart rate decreases, he starts to feel better. He gets up, comes out, and gets peppered with stupid questions for a few more minutes. And then finally, the governor's had enough, and he's ready to make his big, pompous-ass, arrogant statement. Oh, I have a proclamation for all the people. I'm the governor, listen to me. And he says, I'm taking no action now or ever on this application for pardon because I don't think this man is Billy the Kid. And that's it. Fun's over. Governor denies the request, and Morrison and Roberts are publicly humiliated and go back where they came from. So what do you think happens next? Does Morrison say, oh man, that was close. They almost caught me in my huge big fraud. They're onto us. Our hoax has been exposed. I'm glad we weren't arrested. No, he immediately the very next day decides that he's going back to the next governor as soon as he possibly can with more evidence. Now, I'm happy to tell you, I have a whole bunch more stuff that no one's ever seen that I'm going to share with you. And I'm going to start with a transcript of an audio recording of an interview that Mr. Morrison conducted with Brushy Bill Roberts the very next day on December 1st, 1950, where he gets Brushy Bill on audio tape telling what happened. And as much as I would love to play the tape for you, I can't right now. But I have the transcript. That's as good as it's going to get for now. So we're going to get into all of that in the next video. I'm sorry, I just don't have time now. And it's been too long since I've released a video. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. I got a lot more to come. Thank you for listening.